Hey everybody, welcome back to a new video. Right here I have one of the most affordable power stations for 2024. This is the OUPES Mega 2. Now just because this is an affordable unit doesn't mean you have to cut corners on features. For example, this has a massive solar charge controller that's good for 2100 watts input and has a voltage range input of up to 150 volts. This also has a 30 amp dedicated DC output to power your large DC loads. The Mega 2 has an internal LFP battery rated at 2048 watt hours of capacity and has the ability to connect up to 4 expansion batteries for a total capacity over 10 kilowatt hours. This has a 2500 watt pure sine wave inverter. This features UPS functionality with a cutover time of 20 milliseconds. We'll be testing that later in the video. This also features fast internal AC wall charging with adjustable charging speeds, and it also allows dual charging with AC and DC input at the same time. This has smart app connectivity and also dual 100 watt USB-C power delivery ports. Now pricing on the Mega 2 is really good. The MSRP is $14.99, but it's often on sale for less than that. For example, right now this is priced at $1,149, and I also have a 10% off discount code that's valid on their website to take off an additional $115. Now for that price, you're picking this up for 50 cents per watt hour. Now if we compare that against the premium brands like Anker, EcoFlow, and Bluetti, let's see how it stacks up. Now if we look at the Anker F2000, that has a 60 volt solar cutoff and also does not have a 30 amp DC output, but it's priced at $13.99. If we look at the brand new AC200L from Bluetti, that features higher solar input like this one, but it does not have a dedicated 30 amp DC output. That one's priced at $13.99. Now if we look at the EcoFlow Delta 2 Max, that one's even more money at $16.99, and that has the 60 volt solar cutoff and also no 30 amp DC output. So this has more features and comes in at a better price. But what about the actual quality? Now determining the performance or quality of a power station is why I do such in-depth reviews. We are going to put this through a bunch of different tests to see how it really performs. And by the end of the video, you should know if you want this power station or not. Them sending this out for review does not sway my opinion of it. I try to make the most unbiased and honest videos that I can. Now, if you look at the bottom of the video, you'll see a bunch of different chapters of these tests broken down, so you can jump to the parts that you want. Let's go ahead and get started. The first test that I completed on the Mega 2 were with the 2500 watt pure sine wave inverter. You can turn that on by pushing this AC button right here. You have 4 20 amp outlets and you have a 30 amp RV connection, which allows you to connect to your RV, trailer, or even a transfer switch. Let's see how this performed in some real-world tests. In what ways can you use this power station around the house? The OUPES Mega 2 is a great way to keep your fridge running during an extended power outage. With my basement fridge plugged into the AC inverter, the fridge ran for a total of 23.5 hours before the power station died. Plugging in solar panels or connecting an expansion battery can allow for even longer run times. Next, can the Mega 2 run large power tools? To test this out, I connected different power tools like my large miter saw, air compressor, and circular saw into the AC inverter. These tests are a great way to see how the Mega 2 inverter handles inductive or surge loads. As each tool was powered on, the inverter handled the surge load really well, so if you're looking to run power tools at your house or on the go, this model is a great option. How much usable capacity should we expect from the OUPES inverter? The internal LFP battery is rated for 2048 watt hours of capacity. When draining the power station down until it shut off, I was able to measure 1780 watt hours. This result of 1780 watt hours is 86.9% of the advertised capacity and is a great result, hitting our goal of at least 85%. Next, how much power is used as the AC inverter is enabled and sitting idle? I started with the power station at 100% state of charge and left the inverter enabled for 12 hours with no load. And when I came back, it was sitting at 69% state of charge, meaning that the inverter had used 31% of the battery after 12 hours, or about 2.5% per hour. This is fairly high idle power usage compared to other models I've tested. You'll need to plan accordingly when running devices for a long period of time. Now, what quality of power do we see from the Mega 2 inverter? I started the max load test on the inverter by setting up a 2500 watt load. After the test had been going for a few minutes, I checked the output with my oscilloscope. It was showing a pure sine wave output, but it did have some imperfections. I measured 118 volts output at 60 Hertz while running this load. After 10 minutes had passed, the power station fans were running at their full speed. I measured 59 decibels of noise with my sound meter from 3 feet away. During this max load test, I like to use my thermal camera to verify that the power station is getting adequate airflow. I measured a peak of 105 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning that there's plenty of airflow in exchange for slightly louder fans. After I finished those measurements, my stopwatch hit the 15-minute mark and the Mega 2 passed the max load test without shutting down. How many watts will the inverter allow you to pull before it shuts down? I turned up the load from our previous test to a little over 2600 watts, and the power station shut off the inverter and displayed an overloaded error message on the screen. Now, if you remember during our max load test, when we were pulling 2500 watts from the inverter, we saw some imperfections on the output. I wanted to see what wattage that would clear up, so I ran another test at 2350 watts and checked the inverter output, and it was much cleaner. So as long as you keep your loads below 2400 watts, you'll have a very clean sine wave output. Now, I also want to check the status of the ground on the OUPES Mega 2 inverter. Is it floating or is it bonded? So we have the AC inverter enabled. I can plug in my outlet tester. You can see that it is an open or floating ground. Now, if you are trying to run an appliance that requires a bonded connection, you can get a bonding plug like this and plug it in, and then you get the proper wiring. Does the power station inverter create any interference or noise when enabled? This test is helpful for people wanting to run sensitive audio equipment. Using my dirty electricity meter, the electromagnetic interference reading, or EMI, was measuring over 2000 millivolts of noise, which is fairly high. I also wanted to test with my guitar amp plugged into the inverter to see if the output would be affected. Comparing the inverter output to wall power demonstrates that there isn't much audible noise on the inverter, so sometimes EMI and audible noise aren't registered as the same. What about interference on a small handheld AM radio? With the AC inverter turned on, these were the results of the test.
Wednesday in Vegas, what's going to happen or who's going to...
So as long as you keep your sensitive devices a couple feet away from the power station, you should be fine. In the next section of the video, I want to measure the cutover time for the Mega 2 UPS mode. It's advertised to have a 20 millisecond cutover, so let's see how it does. So I currently have my desktop workstation, LED monitor, and studio lights all connected to the AC inverter while running a stress test on the PC to simulate a load. I then have the power station plugged into the wall, so it's passing power straight through to these devices. As we unplug it, it should cut over to battery backup. In order to measure the cutover time, I have my oscilloscope connected to the AC inverter. So let's go ahead and record it and see what happens. 3, 2, 1, record. Okay, so we have on the screen the actual time that the power was cut out. So we had power coming in, it cut out, and then power was resumed. So if we measure the distance between these two cursors, that's the cutover time, and it's 17.7 milliseconds. Now, when comparing that 17.7 milliseconds versus the advertised cutover of 20 milliseconds, it's actually less, so that's good. Now, most sensitive devices are going to require under 20 milliseconds, so it shouldn't have too much of a problem, but let's go ahead and test a couple times just to make sure everything keeps running. Testing, 3, 2, 1. We'll go ahead and do one other test, 3, 2, 1. So decent performance with the Mega 2 while testing the UPS cutover times. My desktop workstation, LED monitor, and studio lights all worked during each cutover. Now, breaking down the AC inverter test results, we were able to get 86% of the advertised capacity, which is good. We also measured 17 milliseconds versus the 20 milliseconds on the UPS cutover, which is better than advertised. And we also got the full 2500 watts from the AC inverter output. Now, there were a few things that weren't ideal. For example, when we were pulling the 2500 watts, the output was a little I guess it just wasn't perfectly clean. So if I drop the power down below 2400 watts, it was much better. So we just keep that in mind as you're pulling maximum loads. Now, the fans are quite loud when you're maxing this out, so you might want to have this in a different area if you are pulling full capacity from the AC inverter. The final thing to keep in mind is that the AC idle power usage is 2.5% per hour, which is a little bit higher than other models that I've tested. Now, what about the DC output on the Mega 2? You have a bunch of different ports to choose from. For example, on this side, you have a 12-volt cigarette socket with two 5521 barrel ports. You can turn those on through this button here. And then on this side of the power station, you have a 12-volt 30-amp DC output, which is an Anderson power pole port. You have two 100-watt USB-C power delivery ports, along with four USB-A quick charge ports that you can turn on through this button here. With all these different options, you have a bunch of use cases. For example, this would be great for a car camping build, this would be great for an overlanding build, or even in a van life build. But how do these ports perform? What voltage do you get from the DC output? I confirmed the DC output of the Mega 2 is regulated at 13.3 volts. This means that you won't have any issues running 12-volt devices even when the power station is near 0%. How much wattage can you pull from each 12-volt port? Connecting my load tester to the cigarette port first, I pulled around 143 watts continuously. I then connected to the 5521 barrel port, and I was also able to pull around 143 watts. If you want to use both the 12-volt socket and the 5521 port at the same time, you're also limited to around 143 watts before it shuts down from being overloaded. The Mega 2 also has a separate 30 amp DC output for higher power DC loads. In order to test this port, I connected up two battery load testers at the same time, pulling 15 amps each. I successfully pulled 360 watts from this port. These higher amperage ports are great for running diesel heaters or multiple DC loads at the same time. How did the USB ports perform? There are 6 USB ports on the front of the OUPES. There are 2 100-watt USB-C power delivery ports and 4 additional USB-A ports that support quick charging protocol. When connecting 2 USB-C cables at the same time, I was able to charge my EcoFlow River 2 Pro and Energizer 320 successfully at 100 watts each. I then tested all USB ports at the same time, connecting up a variety of different devices for a total of 225 watts. Now, how much power can you get from the USB ports and the DC output combined? Plugging devices into the USB ports and the 12-volt sockets, I was able to increase the total power output to about 520 watts from the power station. That is a ton of power. Does the DC output shut off randomly while running loads overnight? In order to make sure that doesn't happen, I plugged my Iceco Go 20 12-volt fridge into the 30 amp port and let it run. Checking in 48 hours later, the DC output had not shut off and the fridge was still running with the power station at 55% state of charge. There are no auto shut-off settings on this model, and you'll get really long run times on devices like CPAPs, 12-volt fans, and DC fridges. Now, how does the DC output affect a handheld AM radio? Here's a demo of what happens when you have a small radio next to the power station with the DC output turned on.
Coming up, more NBA as KD in the front. The season title is decided on Thursday night.
To avoid this small interference, you'd want to keep your sensitive devices a couple feet away. How much usable capacity can we pull from the DC output as we discharge the power station? The Mega 2 is advertised to have 2,048 watt-hours of capacity, and while draining the power station completely down via my battery load tester, I was able to pull a total of 1,695 watt-hours. These results were only 82.7% of the advertised capacity, which is slightly below my goal of at least 85%. Now finally, how much power is used while the DC output is sitting idle with no load? I started the test at 100% state of charge on the power station, and checking in 12 hours later, it was at 92% state of charge, meaning the high DC output is somewhat efficient and only uses 0.6% per hour while sitting enabled with no load. Now, breaking down the results of the DC output testing, we almost pulled a total of 550 watts from both the 12-volt socket and the USB ports combined. So if you're looking for a power station with a lot of raw power through DC output, this is a great option. Now, we did have to have a trade-off of raw power for efficiency. When we did a capacity test through this, we only got 82.7%, so a little bit short of our goal of 85%. So a little bit less efficiency for that total power output. So in the next portion of the video, we are going to talk about charging the OUPES Mega 2. What charging cables does it come with? What about the charging ports and their specifications? We'll also do a bunch of different charging scenarios to see how it performs. Here on the table, I have all the DC charging cables that come with the power station. Right here is for car charging. This has a 12-volt socket to Anderson power pole. Right here is for solar charging. This has MC4 connections to Anderson power pole. Then we also have another solar adapter. This is for OUPES's branded solar panels with Anderson power pole to 7909. These are all 14 gauge wire. Now there are two additional cables that come with the power station. We have our AC wall charging cable, and we also have this Anderson to Anderson 12 gauge cable that's meant for the high amp DC output. Now the charging input ports are on the right side of the power station behind this protective cover. The top charging port is for DC input. It has a voltage range of 12 volts all the way up to 150 volts DC and will limit the current to 15 amps automatically. This supports a massive 2100 watts of solar input. Below that you have your AC charging port. This is where you charge with a gas generator or your wall outlet. This will charge at either 1600 watts or 800 watts. It does have adjustability. Speaking of adjustable charging, let's go through that process. You're going to push the IoT button and then the DC button right after. You hold them down together until on the screen that it starts flashing this. You can change the setting by pushing the IoT button. High means fast charging, low means slow charging. High will be around 1600 watts, low will be around 800 watts. Once you have your setting selected, you press and hold the power button for a few seconds. Then it will flash and say success. To get back to the main menu, you press and hold the power button again, and then you're back to normal. Now I want to do a demo of the AC charging on the power station, so I've connected the AC charging cable. I have this set to the fast charging speed, so let's see how many watts we can get. So I have been letting this charge for a couple minutes here. We are sitting at 1550 watts. I've seen it jump up to almost 1600, so it is jumping between 1550 and 1600 watts. Now if you're on the higher charging speed, the fans do rev up. They put out around 53 to 54 decibels of noise. With the power station adjusted to the low charging speed, we're getting around 765 to 775 watts charging input, and the fans aren't as loud. For example, the fans on low charging speed are around 47 to 48 decibels. Now what about DC charging on the Mega 2? I have my high-powered AC to DC converter plugged into the Anderson power pole port. Let's go ahead and simulate a few different battery voltages. If you're going to charge this in your vehicle off a 12-volt battery, you're going to see a little bit over 100 watts charging input. This would take around 20 hours to fully charge the power station if it was completely empty. For this test, I have the voltage set to 13.3 volts to simulate a 12-volt battery, and I have the amperage actually turned up to 15 amps, but the power station is limiting it to 8 amps right now, so it protects the vehicle wiring and doesn't blow a fuse. Connecting up a 24-volt battery gives you around 350 watts of charging input. This reduces the full charging time down to about 6 hours. For this test, I have it set to 24 volts, and I set the power supply to 18 amps input, and you can see the power station is keeping it right under the 15 amp limit. With my power supply set to 36 volts, now we're charging a little over 500 watts. This will take around 4 hours to completely fill the power station if it was all the way empty. Now I apologize for the background noise. This is the fan of my power supply. I have it turned up to 55 volts to simulate a 48 volt server rack battery. Let's see what we're charging at on the power station. On the screen, we're seeing about 825 watts. This will take 2.5 hours to completely fill the power station. Checking in on the power supply, it's at 55.99 volts, and the power station is limiting the input right under 15 amps. Now, unfortunately, my power supply is only good for 1200 watts, and this can take up to 2100 watts of DC input. So we're going to max out my power supply and see if we can get the full 1200 watts. So I have the power supply set to 120 volts and 10 amps. We are currently getting 1165 watts, so really close to the 1200 watt limit of this unit. So looking at the screen, we're getting near the maximum output of my DC power supply, which is 1200 watts. So quite a bit of power that we can put into this power station. The only way to go higher than this would be testing with solar. Now what about dual charging on the Mega 2? Can it support AC input and DC input at the same time, meaning that you can charge from solar panels and wall power to get more charging speed? Let's connect up both charging sources and see what happens. Now with both AC and DC plugged into the power station, we are charging at over 2200 watts input, meaning it does support dual charging with AC and DC at the same time. Now what about pass-through charging on the Mega 2? Can it charge and discharge at the same time? That means that you could have the AC inverter, USB ports, and DC output all enabled while the power station is still charging. Now, if you look at the screen, you can see we have around 560 watts going out to the devices through the AC inverter and DC output, and we're charging the power station at around 720 watts. So this does support full pass-through charging. Now I have the OUPES Mega 2 outside, and I want to do some real-world solar demos. So I want to connect it up to the 1600 watt array that's on top of my carport. Now you can see the conditions today are a bit mixed. It's around 45 degrees, and we have some clouds. I'll try to test when it's pretty clear. Now I have the Mega 2 here in my shed so we can see the display. It's just really bright outside. I set up a stopwatch so we can see how long it takes to get to full power on the charge controller. It just takes a bit to ramp up. So on the screen we're sitting at 1000 watts input, and we're almost at the 3-minute mark. I'll give it a little bit more time to see if we can hit max power. So the stopwatch hit the 5-minute mark, and we're getting around 1151 watts input from the solar array today. So not the best conditions for testing, but still a lot of power in on the power station. And you can see it took around 5 minutes to get up to full charging power. Now, unfortunately, that 1600 watt array is fairly flat when it's sitting on the carport right there, so I can't really angle that up any higher to get better power. So it's just the time of year and what I expect from the current conditions. Now, due to the 150 volt input, I do have other arrays that I could test with. For example, this 1000 watt array here, or this 975 watt array here. These are both under 150 volts, so I could also test with those, but with the mixed conditions, I wouldn't expect much more power. I think it's also important to know if we can have solar panels connected to the OUPES Mega 2 24/7. So what happens in the early morning hours with solar connected? I've had this Renogy 1000 watt solar array connected overnight. So let's go check in on the power station. So in this testing scenario, I had the OUPES Mega 2 turned off and I had solar connected. So as the solar panels got brighter, it automatically turned on and it is trying to charge. Some power stations that I've tested in low light conditions will have a relay that clicks on and off for solar charging, or they'll have an annoying beep. And this one does not appear to be doing that. So I give this a thumbs up for having solar connected 24/7. Now, if you have questions about how to connect solar panels up to this power station or what solar panels to choose, I've started a basic consulting service. I'll include the link down in the video description. Click on the link and you can get in direct contact with me. Now, one of the biggest advantages of the OUPES Mega 2 is the fact that it takes in so much charging. With the ability to dual charge with AC and DC input and the massive charge controller, you can charge this up very quickly. Another advantage is that each of the expansion batteries for the Mega 2 also have that same charge controller for up to 2100 watts of solar input, so you can stack a ton of solar onto this power station, especially as you expand it out. Now, one downside to the charging that I noticed is that it's just super slow to get up to that full charging speed. For example, when you connect in solar panels, it has to think for a while and it slowly ramps up, so about 5 to 7 minutes later, you're getting full charging speed. But some other power stations that I've tested, you plug in the solar panels and within 20 to 30 seconds or a minute, it's already at the fast charging speed. So maybe it's just the way that they've designed it. It does take a little bit to get up to that maximum speed. Now, the OUPES Mega 2 does have smart app connectivity, so let's go ahead and check some of the features. So looking at the main screen, you get an estimated time remaining at the current state of what's happening. You get your battery temperature, you get your battery state of charge, you get a breakdown of your watts that are coming in, so for solar or AC power. You can also see how many batteries you have connected up. For output, you have the ability to turn on and off the AC inverter, the DC output, and USB ports. For example, you can just turn those on with the press of a button and turn them off. Now for the actual settings, wait for this to load. You can rename the device. You can change the temperature units. Now this is important right here, the auto timeouts. Make sure you have these set to never if you want this to run through the night. If you have these set to a certain time for them to turn off, they will turn off automatically. The screen timeout is how long you want the screen on, so I usually have that set to 30 seconds. You do have the ability to update the firmware, so once there's a new firmware version available, it will show up in here. Well, now that I completed testing on the AC inverter, the DC output, and completed a bunch of charging demos, let's talk about the warranty and support for the Mega 2. Now, OUPES offers a 3-year warranty for this device, and on their website, they have multiple channels for support. They have a chat support channel, they have an email support channel, and also a phone number that you can dial. Now, I did reach out to them over the phone. I hit them after hours, so I left a voicemail, and they actually got back to me the next day, which is fairly impressive. Now, other than that, I don't have too much experience with OUPES customer support, so I'm going to rely on you guys. If you guys have feedback about working with OUPES customer support, leave a comment down below. Let me know what it was like and how it went. Now, one thing that sets me apart from other reviewers on YouTube is that I've created a power station grading system on my website. I'll include a link to it down in the video description so you guys can check it out. Now, what I do on that is I take all the performance numbers from the testing today and I give the power station a grade so we can compare them head to head and see which one comes out on top. So here's a look at the Power Station Grading System 2.0. There are 20 requirements in order for a power station to get a perfect score of 10 points. Each one's worth a half point. Let's see how the Mega 2 performed. So the Mega 2 got 9 points out of 10 points available, or an A-. Now, it missed out on 2 requirements. The first one was that it did not get 85% of the DC capacity, so it missed out on a half point there. And the second one was the fan noise was above 55 decibels, so it missed out on a half point there. 9 points is a really good score, especially for an affordable power station. Now, believe it or not, this budget model here that scored 9 out of 10 points available beats some of the more premium brands on price, performance, and features. Now, this model is not perfect. There's definitely some little quirks with it, or pros and cons, and in the last section of the video, I want to talk about those pros and cons so you guys can make a decision if this one's right for you. Now, I like to get the negative stuff out of the way first, so let's talk about the cons of the Mega 2. The first con is the fan noise. They are very loud, especially when you're running a max load on the AC inverter, or if you're charging at a high speed. So if you don't like fan noise, you're going to want to put this in a separate room, and maybe that will solve it for you. But just be aware the fans are loud. Con number 2 is the fact that when we discharged this, we did not get as much capacity through the DC output as we did with the AC inverter. We only got 82.7% of the rated output. The third con that I can think of is that whenever you're charging with solar, it takes a long time for it to get up to the full charging speed. Now, if it's a pure sunny day, that's not an issue, but if it's a cloudy day or if a cloud goes by, it resets down to 0 and then it starts all the way back up. So just depending on the weather conditions, that could be quite an annoyance. Now that might be able to be fixed through a firmware update in the future. I have reported that to the OUPES support engineers, and we'll see if they can fix that through a firmware update. But those are the cons for the Mega 2. Breaking down the pros for the Mega 2, this power station is all about value. You get a lot of power for a really good price, especially with a good feature set. You have a powerful AC inverter with a decent sine wave output. I love that it has the 30 amp RV port on the front, so connecting to your RV or to a transfer switch is fairly easy without using any extra adapters. You get the fast AC wall charging with adjustable levels, and the fact that this does support AC and DC charging at the same time. A lot of brands don't support that. You have the smart app connectivity and a ton of DC outputs, and I especially love the 30 amp DC output on the front. So for the price, you get a lot with the Mega 2. You guys will have to let me know, do the pros outweigh the cons? What are your thoughts on the Mega 2? Now, if you want to learn more about the Mega 2, I will have the link to it down in the video description. Also, with the 10% off discount code, so you can save that additional $115. I appreciate you guys watching to the end of the video. If you like the video, please smash the thumbs up button, share it with your friends and family. I'll recommend a couple other videos that you should check out on the channel. We'll see you guys in the next one.